Hello and welcome to the Thesis Mapping Planning the PhD in its entirety webinar. This video should be watched after you engage with the Thesis Mapping PDF resource, and it will provide you with some more in-depth information on how you can make use of the main thesis planning techniques outlined in the document. This includes producing a thesis map, drawing spider diagrams, applying the Snowflake Method, and applying the reverse outline method. These resources are aiming to help you get started with organizing your writing, and they are suitable for postgraduate researchers at any stage of their research degree. If you haven't started writing, engaging with the techniques outlined in this video is your chance to put a writing map in place. If you have done a lot of writing already, but you're concerned that it is messy and very disorganized, the resources will help you bring it all together in a meaningful way. A thesis map is like a personalized template or a scaffold that you put in place to help you construct the main body of the work. A thesis map can help you identify the boundaries of your project, the structure and flow of the main ideas, as well as to project manage. Ultimately, producing a thesis map will help you get a sense of what your thesis may look like as a whole. It can also give you a much-needed sense of control over your progress, which is very important because doing a research degree is a long-term project and the workload often feels unmanageable. The other three approaches to writing that we will look in this video, namely spider diagrams, the Snowflake Method, and reverse outline, are organizing and brainstorming techniques that can help you populate the structure and content of each of your thesis chapters in your map. So let's start with producing a thesis map. A thesis map comprises of an overview of all the chapters that make up your thesis, so it is essentially a bird's eye view of all your work. Alongside this webinar, you should also have access to an example thesis map, which has been produced by Inger Newburn in 2008 for her last PhD report and is released for circulation under a Creative Commons license. Before producing the thesis map, it is a good idea to write down an abstract for your project. Abstracts are a great way to check in with yourself about the direction of your project, as they force you to articulate your research gap and your key contributions in just a single paragraph. I'm a very big fan of abstracts and tend to write and rewrite them again and again as a research project evolves and new findings emerge, which means that my main arguments are constantly refined as well. I'm highlighting this to indicate that an abstract is there to give direction to your thesis map, but it is not something that is set in stone, and it is expected of you to rewrite it often as your work progresses. In the slide, I provide you with a simple template for writing an abstract. Notice how this takes a storytelling approach, so it asks you to narrate how once upon a time researchers believed something. That corresponds to a brief overview of your literature review. But then you, as the researcher, thought that maybe, which provides an overview of your aims. So what you did was providing an overview of your methods, and then you've discovered that providing an overview of your findings, which change the way we potentially think, feel, or understand a phenomenon, and that's your contribution to knowledge. This is intentional, and it is aiming to keep the process lighthearted and take the pressure off trying to write a perfect abstract. So this is not about perfection, it is about having a starting point that will act as a compass for the rest of the thesis map. I would also advise that you avoid jargon or complicated language here. Just keep it simple at this stage. If you don't feel ready to write an abstract, for example, you might be at the very early stages of your research degree, you can try instead and provide a rationale for your project by filling in these sentences. My thesis in a single sentence is, the thesis contributes to knowledge by, the thesis is important because, my research questions are. Moving on to mapping your introduction chapter, take some time to consider and provide responses to the following questions. What is the call to action? This essentially refers to what you want the reader to think, feel, or do differently after reading your thesis. Try to keep your response to 150 words maximum, and keep in mind that this seemingly odd question is designed to get you to think about what is important in your work at a higher level of abstraction. Then, provide 1 to 2 sentences on the background and context of the project, the research problem, the aim and scope of the work, and its significance. If you are unsure what to include under each section, the next slide provides some more detailed recommendations. From the introduction onwards, mapping your thesis is quite a repetitive process. For each upcoming chapter, you will need to provide the title of the chapter, a 1-paragraph summary of its content, which essentially summarizes the broad purpose, the main arguments that you will address, and what the reader should have learned after reading it. You should also try to provide an indicative list of all the possible headings that will comprise the chapter. Once your thesis map is complete, you can start populating the different chapters with existing bits of writing. Remember that you don't have to start from scratch here, and you should adopt a flexible definition with regards to what counts as existing writing. For example, writing from your research proposal, your annual performance review, or a conference abstract all count as useful words. Don't worry too much about quality or the flow of your writing at this stage. This is merely about populating your map with some initial scribblings that you will later on integrate and edit as needed. Another thing you can do once your thesis map is complete is to use it as the basis of project managing your work. For example, next to each chapter or subheading, you can attach approximate word counts and deadlines by which you aim to complete the work. Lastly, remember, similarly to your abstract, your thesis map is not a fixed document that is set in stone. It is expected that you will update it and revise it as your work evolves. This means that some chapters will be expanded, others may be entirely eliminated or absorbed elsewhere, and new chapters or headings will be added. The important point about the map is to maintain that bird's eye view of your thesis. Spider diagrams are by far my favorite technique to use when I'm thinking about how to structure a chapter or even a section in a piece of writing I'm doing. They are especially suitable for the early stages of writing. I will demonstrate how you can produce a spider diagram through an example. To construct a spider diagram, start with an initial question or statement that you put in a bubble. This can be the main research question of your thesis, but it may also be a key idea that you want to explore in a particular chapter or even a subsection within that chapter. For example, let's assume that I have to write an article that explores whether PhDs are a good choice to advance one's career pathway. Note that it is up to me to phrase this as a research question, as I have, or as a statement that I wish to explore more. For example, from here, draw 3 legs out of the main bubble. The choice of 3 is deliberate. We tend to think a lot in binaries, like yes or no, up or down. Thinking in 3s forces creativity and thinking in more unfamiliar ways. Likewise, limiting yourself to 3 is crucial, as it helps you start to establish which questions are more important than others. Then, draw bubbles at the end of the 3 legs and put 3 more questions or statements in them. Make sure these questions are logically related to the primary question or statement, and they help you explore it in some more depth. In my example, in order to explore the main research question, I might, for example, ask, what evidence do we have that PhDs are a good choice to advance one's career? What skill set does one develop during the course of a doctorate? And does the discipline of the PhD make a difference? So you see, each of my sub-questions is very different in nature, but they each help me to explore my core research question. Now, I will draw out more legs for each of my secondary bubbles and start to make notes about things I already know, for example from the literature or my data, or jot down things that I need to find out or establish. In my example, I will jot down things that I think would be useful to establish. So with regards to evidence, I will need to research how quickly do PhD graduates secure jobs. And I might also look at reports on where are the graduates 10 years post-PhD. For the skill set that one develops during the PhD, I might explore whether the skill set is important to various work sectors, and whether the graduate would have developed the same skill set if they had gone straight into work after their taught degree. Lastly, to explore whether discipline makes a difference, I might question what are the advantages of interdisciplinary work specifically. And I might also look into how graduates from different disciplines compare. Once I have the bird's eye view of my questions and key arguments, I can check for sense and consider whether some bubbles should be rearranged or eliminated to improve the flow of ideas. More importantly, however, and this is the reason why I like spider diagrams, if you do a good job here, this can serve as the structure of your next piece of writing.
So, for example, the bubble in the center can be the topic of a chapter of your PhD, with each of the 3 second-level bubbles serving as a subheading, and the third-level bubbles serving as content for each subheading. Or you can draw a spider diagram for a small section of writing, with each second-level bubble representing a paragraph and third-level bubbles representing the content of each paragraph. However you choose to use spider diagrams, remember that they are meant to be a flexible tool, and there is no right or wrong in terms of how you apply them. I also recommend that you do this exercise on a whiteboard or simply pen and paper rather than doing it on your laptop, as this tends to unlock a degree of creativity in your thinking.
The Snowflake Method is all about organizing your ideas and materials in preparation for writing. It is essentially a method for managing your creativity and your messy thoughts. If you are like most postgraduate research students, you probably spend a lot of time thinking about your thesis than you do writing it. So you might, for example, do a lot of research, reflection, brainstorming, and this is an informal process all researchers go through. But also, this process has a degree of procrastination built in it, because very often we don't know where to get started. So the Snowflake method aims to help with that. The method, as discussed in this video, is adapted from Randy Ingermason's Snowflake method for designing a novel, and its philosophy is very simple. It's based on the idea that writers often start from one very simple big idea or argument, and over time they develop it and add complexity. So metaphorically speaking, you often start from a triangle, which evolves to a star, and that star evolves to a more elaborate crystal, and the crystal eventually turns into a complex snowflake. The Snowflake method can be applied to any piece of writing. For example, you can use it to develop a chapter of your thesis from your thesis map or a conference paper. For the purposes of this video, I will assume that we are applying the method to develop a thesis chapter. The first step is to develop a short synopsis of the chapter that touches on the main ideas as well as the materials you will incorporate to support those ideas. And this is perhaps where it becomes more evident how the Snowflake method is different to spider diagrams, because where spider diagrams get you to think about mainly the flow of arguments and ideas, The Snowflake method pushes you to take things further and to start thinking about what you will need to support those arguments and ideas. So what are the main points of the chapter going to be? And in order to answer this question, you might choose to produce a spider diagram as we saw in the previous section of the video. Then, what other type of resources or evidence will you need to incorporate? Here you might consider, for example, whether you will rely on existing literature or utilize primary data, or whether you will need to work on any frameworks, diagrams, or tables to support your points. You don't need to provide a whole lot of detail at this stage. Finally, consider how the main points in this chapter relate to the overall argument of your thesis. In other words, why is this chapter important and what purpose does it serve in the overall piece of work? Once you have a broad synopsis ready, make a long, unfiltered list of everything you think should be in that chapter. It's okay for your list to be messy. So think about what questions you're trying to answer through your writing, what specific instances of data you will need to use, what areas of literature are important for the chapter, maybe even jotting down names of key authors and key works, and what thoughts or observations need to be incorporated in your writing. This is your opportunity to do a very messy brain dump of everything that you feel must go in the chapter without yet thinking about flow or structure. Visually, in terms of detail, your triangle has now become a star. The next stage requires you to review your messy list and organize it. The easiest way to do this is to think about the subheadings that will comprise the chapter, and then arrange the material from your list under those subheadings as you think it fits best. You can also add a provisional word count for each subheading to get a better sense of the writing load ahead of you. Visually, your star now has become a crystal. The last stage of the method requires you to do even more nitty-gritty organizing. Here, you should use a table format to organize your ideas and key materials, as well as to do some early stage writing that will help you flesh out the main arguments. There is no fixed format for this table, but here's an example of how it might look like.
Make a row for each of the main headings of the chapter. Then for each heading, have a column that organizes the 2 or 3 main arguments, the literature and key authors that you will draw from, the primary data you may need, notes that incorporate your thoughts and observations, and lastly, a column that allows you to do a bit of free writing on the key arguments.
For those of you that are not familiar with free writing, it is a simple activity designed to unlock creativity in writing. So you pick one of your main ideas and you do 5 minutes of non-stop writing, anything that comes to your mind that relates to that idea, without worrying about flow or grammar or even the quality of writing at this stage. The purpose of this is to unlock your brain and to give you a starting point as to seek to develop your chapter further. Reverse outline is very different from the other methods we looked at in this video, because the aim here is not necessarily to develop new writing, but to organize writing that you have already done and that is looking very messy or lacks proper flow. A reverse outline is a plan made from an existing draft. The idea of the reverse outline is to diagnose any potential problems with your arguments and identify ways forward without changing around too much with the existing text and potentially destroying good work. Reverse outlining allows you to restructure your writing after it has been written, making it flow logically again. Even if you've used the spider diagram or the Snowflake method to plan your writing, you may find that along the way it has become difficult to stick to your plan. That's because planning in advance methods assume you know what you're going to write beforehand, but in practice your thinking develops as you are writing, and thinking and writing are processes that are intimately connected. So the reality of academic writing is rarely as neat and straightforward as your plan suggests. Reverse outlining can help you refine your structure. The steps that you need to take to apply the reverse outline method are outlined in the PDF document of your thesis mapping resource. So in this video, I will demonstrate how you can apply those steps with a very simple example. For the purposes of this, I will use an edited version of a newspaper article that appeared in October 2019 and that is examining whether pet ownership is a good thing.
Read through your messy draft and identify the sentence that contains the key idea from each paragraph. If you can't find the key idea, or there are two or more, write a brief description of what the paragraph is about. Then, cut and paste the sentences containing the key ideas into a new document or in a different place in the same document. Read the sequence over and decide if the order works. If it doesn't, you will need to rearrange. In my example, it would make more sense if I rearrange the sentences so that the benefits of pet ownership are presented in order, followed by the disadvantages of pet ownership, and concluding with the argument that there is no clear answer as to whether pet ownership is good or bad for you, as it depends on the person and the situation. Remember that your own writing is likely to be a lot messier and more complicated than my example, and you may need to not just reorder sentences, but also to add new ones for ideas that you feel are missing. You may also choose to delete some ideas that don't fit in with this section anymore, or to merge ideas together. There is no right or wrong pathway here, and you will need to experiment with some trial and error. So, in my example, I could have chosen instead to arrange sentences so that I present in order all the health-related benefits and disadvantages of pet ownership, followed by exploring the emotional benefits and disadvantages of pet ownership, and finishing off with my conclusion. In any case, through this rearranging, I have ended up with a list of sentences that capture the storyline of the article. The next step is to now copy and paste the content corresponding to each sentence from the original draft. Be careful here, as depending on how you have arranged the key sentences, you may need to group related content, delete content, or make note for content that you need to generate from scratch. Now, read through the draft. The flow, of course, won't be perfect, because at this stage you have not really edited the main text, but as you read through, is there a coherent story emerging? If you feel the overall story does not flow properly or has gaps, you may well need to go back to your individual sentences and rearrange them again, or add and remove as appropriate.
When you are broadly happy with your storyline, look at the content of each paragraph and ask yourself, is the paragraph convincing? Since this is academic writing, each paragraph should have at least some of the elements that you see on your screen. If anything is missing, make a note of it inside each paragraph in brackets using color. This will help you see what needs to be added more clearly, and it's your opportunity to add new writing, make comments on things you need to chase up or refine before you can write about them. Finally, avoid holding on to writing that doesn't serve a purpose. It is often very difficult for researchers to press delete. It sometimes seems as if deleting text will make a valuable point disappear. In reality, though, academic writing is as much about what you put into the text as it is about what you choose to leave out. If you feel uncomfortable deleting content, then just cut it and paste it in a separate file. This way you can make peace with yourself that the writing is there should you ever need it for another purpose. To wrap up, remember that reverse outline is a good technique to apply if you're looking for some objective distance between yourself and your writing, so that you can figure out the flow and let go of the parts that don't serve any real purpose or take away from your main argument. We have now come to the end of the webinar. I recommend that you take some time to consider both how and when you will apply the techniques that you learned. Proper thesis mapping and putting together a writing plan is not something that you can do on a whim, so give yourself proper time to engage with the process. Remember that putting together a map will help you get a much needed sense of control over your writing. It will clarify your thinking and your main arguments, and it will also hold you more accountable towards your work progress.